Well, Michael Mann is a distinguished professor of atmospheric science and director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University. He joins me now from State College in Pennsylvania. Great to have you on the program, Professor. In the first instance, as we saw in that report there from my colleague, we're in the last days of the COP26. So much had been banking on this, but it doesn't look like we're going to get anywhere near the targets that the world needs at this point.
Thanks. It's good to be with you. And you're right. We're not going to get the sort of progress that many of us had hoped for. But there has been a fair amount of progress that's already been made. And your correspondent spoke to that earlier. If you take all of the pledges that have been made at this point and the totality of those pledges and you plug them into a computer model, what you find is that the warming likely now comes in below 2 degrees Celsius. We likely keep the planet less than 2 degrees Celsius warmer relative to the pre-industrial. Now that's roughly half of where we were headed just a decade ago, towards 4 degrees Celsius. 4 degrees Celsius, well, that would be a catastrophic future. 2 degrees Celsius, that's going to be a tough future. We want to get it down below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and there's a lot of work that still has to be done to get there. But this isn't the end. Glasgow isn't the end of the process. In some sense, it's the beginning of an era where we are starting to make some real progress. We're starting to bend that emissions curve downward, which we need to do.
Yeah, Professor, interesting that you say that it isn't the end. I remember the Paris Agreement. That was supposed to be the point at which we really solved climate change. And yet here we are at COP26. And yes, further down the road. But what else needs to be done?
Yeah, and make no mistake, there has been some progress since Paris. We flattened the curve in Paris. Basically, carbon emissions stopped rising. Well, that's the first step, but we've got to bring them down, and we've got to bring them down about 50% globally within the next decade. So what needs to happen? Well, even the conservative International Energy Agency, the IEA, which has been no cheerleader for renewable energy, has been very blunt. We need to end all new fossil fuel infrastructure. And that means that the United States, the UK, the EU, Australia, we can't continue to build new oil and gas pipelines and new coal mines. That just isn't consistent with the pathway that keeps warming below catastrophic levels.
Professor, are you seeing that political will at COP26 to make what you're describing a reality?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you where I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it in the tens of thousands of children who are marching in the streets, because that's where the pressure is coming. We've seen quite a bit of a change in the narrative, a change in the dialogue. Politicians at least starting to talk the talk. We need them to walk the walk. But we've seen a sea change in the overall framing, and that's because of the pressure that youth climate protesters have put on, world leaders. And so they need to keep that pressure on. It's making a real difference.
Michael Mann, the distinguished professor of atmospheric science at Penn State University. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
Thank you.